This is another training video by SQL Server 2012 tutorial.com. Today our topic of discussion is creating database objects. So without any further delay, let's take a look. Which objects are we talking about? Well, the objects we will take a look at today include the actual database. As you know, databases are the building blocks of storage in SQL Server 2012. And then we will also talk about tables that include fields, also known as columns, and records, which is also known as rows. So those are the two items that we will cover. So as far as creating a database, you can use multiple methods in SQL Server. The first one, which is the easiest one to do, is to use the SQL Server Management Studio, or it's also known as SSMS. We will create a database doing that first. Then we will take a look at Transact SQL, which is also commonly known as T-SQL. And then we will cover Template Browser, which is yet another option. And this actually used to be known as Template Explorer, but pretty much is the same thing. Okay. So moving on, as far as creating a database using SSMS, this is definitely the easiest way to do this. Let's take a look at some important considerations. When naming objects, you should always use intuitive information with no spaces. So for example, like it says here, if your database is going to contain sales type information like customers, orders, go ahead and call it sales. I mean, don't use some generic name or some random word to describe that. Okay. Another important point is, as far as performance, the data file and the log file, these really should be on separate physical drives. Now, why is that? Well, what happens is that over time your database is going to get rather large, right? And your data file is typically going to be used for reading information, while a log file is always written to. So in other words, one file is doing a lot more read activity and the other one is doing a lot more write activity. And if you put them on the same drive, then you're gonna lose some performance as the disk is trying to decide what are you trying to achieve. So this is why you need to separate that as a best practice. Now, as far as if you're running a production database, let's say a 24/7 type operation, the recovery model should be set to full. Okay. And then finally, auto growth, which is a parameter that we will take a look at, you should always use MB, megabytes, instead of using the percent. And this will make sense as we go through our demos. So the first thing we're going to do is to create a database called school. This is going to contain information like students and teachers and whatnot. So before we do that, let me show you how to launch SSMS. You're going to do all programs, Microsoft SQL Server 2012, and then SQL Server Management Studio. By the way, you will notice that I will switch between SQL and SQL. Either one is fine. I prefer using SQL, but I will go back and forth between them. So once I launch this, it's going to ask you which server do you need to connect to, and I'm running SQL Server 2012 on my local box. In your case, you may be running this in your company, so you will have to connect to your proper server, I guess. And then once you're in your instance, the next thing you need to do is you need to go to Object Explorer, Database, and then New Database. Okay. And then you enter information like file, location, size, and whatnot. So let's go ahead and do that. We are going to switch gears. I'm going to go to Start, All Programs, Microsoft SQL Server 2012, and then Management Studio. Now, as it launches this, it is going to ask you, what there are two important things. First of all, you need to choose what server type are we connecting to. In our case, we are choosing database engine, but be mindful that you can connect to other things like reporting services, integration services, and we will cover those at a later video. But for now, we are going to connect to database engine, and server name, in our case, we're just using a period, which means it's connecting to my local machine. You could possibly add a machine name in here if you have that. You could even add a IP address or something along those lines. Some people do that, but for me it's my local machine. I am using Windows authentication, and another option is to use SQL authentication, which for now we're not going to use, and then I will simply hit connect. Okay, so now we are in Management Studio, and this window here is called Object Explorer. There is another one which is known as Registered Servers, where you can organize your servers. We will primarily be working in Object Explorer. If you want to know more about the layout and whatnot, we do have another video that pretty much talks about SQL Server Management Studio, so I would definitely encourage that you watch that. Now if I come back to my PowerPoint, notice that I need to go to Object Explorer, Database, and New Database, and for now I'm just going to use this as my name. So I go to the Database tab. Okay, in fact I will just right click on it, select New Database. Okay, and this is where we need to enter information on the database. So I'm adding school as the name of my database. You'll notice in here that it automatically creates two files. This first one is, like I mentioned, the actual data file, okay, and the second one is the log file. Now if I expand this, you'll notice that there are a few things we need to consider. We had mentioned the auto growth. I'm going to click on the ellipses, and this is what I was saying, that instead of percent, it's better to use megabytes. And what happens is, as your database grows big, you want to include it by increments. Okay, so let's say maybe your database is 10 gigs, okay, and if you're trying to add it by 10%, that is 1 gig at a time, which is a huge amount of space. So we prefer to do, or it's best practice to add in megabytes. For now I'm okay with unlimited. This is not something you should do as far as in production environment. And then I'm also going to change the setting for my log file. Going to use megabytes again, and then let's go ahead and use 100 megabytes. Okay, we'll leave unlimited. Now as far as path, you'll notice that again I am using a C drive in my case. This is not the preferred location. If this was a database server, you should definitely be seeing multiple drives in here. In fact, it's not uncommon to have program files for SQL on C, data files on D, log files on E, and whatnot. But I'm just doing a demo, so I will leave those as is. You could feel free to look under options. I'm not really going to change anything. One thing I did want to make sure that I'm using a recovery model of full, and we will cover that in a separate video. But file groups, again, I don't need to change anything in here, and then I will click OK. So just like that, we have created our school database. If you expand this node, you'll notice that we have several different options. So let's go ahead and take a look at the tables. You just click on the plus button, and notice there are no tables in here as of yet. So that is simply how you create a database using SSMS. The other item is to create a database using T-SQL, which as I mentioned is known as Transact SQL. So what you do is you use a command called create database command. Here is a basic syntax. So let us go down this list. Quite a few flags in here. Don't be alarmed, it's not really rocket science. You use create database command, then you actually give it the name of the database, okay, and then you use the word on, okay, And now if you look, we are basically separating the two parts. This part up here has to do with the data file, and this part here has to do with a log file. They look very similar, so I'll just cover this one maybe. Here it mentions this is the logical name for the log file. Okay, this is physical location, which in our case we just saw the C drive, initial file size in MB, and then maximum file size in MB, which is megabytes, and then file growth, which is a parameter using either % or MB. And like I mentioned, you do want to use MB as a preferred method. I will say that one more item in here as far as size. Let's say you anticipate the database to be quite large with lots of information. It is much better to create space for it in the beginning instead of starting out with a small database and you let SQL Server manage the space. So in other words, you should put some consideration into it and do some planning and come up with a better estimate for creating this database. So for this one, we are going to create an HR database, and I already have a script ready to go. So again, I am going to switch to Management Studio and load up a script. So in order to load the script, you go to File, Open, File. You can also do Control O, okay? Or my favorite is just clicking on this icon, and it is going to bring up your C drive. We already have this ready to do its magic. And real quickly, if you see, you have the by the way, you always use master database to create a new database, as that is the heart of SQL Server that controls a lot of this information. So we have to do that. Then like I mentioned, we just use the syntax create database. The name of our database is HR. This, again, if you're paying attention, is our data file information, and this is our log information. Okay, and I have everything in here ready to go. As far as executing code in SQL Server, you just highlight the part that you would like to execute, and then you can either hit F5 or this little exclamation button over here. And now if we did this right, it should go ahead and create an HR database, and you'll notice the confirmation down here, commands completed successfully. Now if you notice, we still do not see an HR database in here, and this is one of those things in SQL Server that you will get used to. You have to right click wherever you are and then select good old refresh. Okay, when I do that, you should see HR pop right here. Okay, so that was that. There are a few other vital database commands that I would like to mention. You have alter database, which basically